We come now to the second most divisive issue among people, money. As with sex, the reason that money causes so many fallings out between people is that a large component of selfishness is involved. And as with sex, my advice is starkly simple. It is a great mistake to borrow money from people, and an even greater mistake to lend it. But such things happen, especially in today's economy, which is brought about by citizens following the example of their governments, and leaping into a bottomless pit of debt. Were it not for the costly ventures of wars, ranging from Vietnam to the Falkland Islands, many Western countries would be in much better financial shape than they are. But when dealing with politicians, as I have observed for 75 years, the obvious is something which they discover only after they have exhausted every other explanation. Indebtedness is unwise, but it is also fashionable, so we are bound to see a great deal more of it. And where the personal finances of spouses, lovers, friends, flatmates are concerned, we are likely to see a great deal of ill-tempered squabbling over money and who owes what to whom. These are some of the ways which may help to keep such relationships smooth. First of all, one should try to get out of allowing anyone to borrow anything at all by forestalling demands. Usually, when someone is about to put the touch on you, there will be some sort of preamble, broadly hinting at his impecunious state. He won't just rush up to you and say, "Lend me £500. He will have to explain that he is in a great predicament and doesn't know how to deal with it, that he has absurdly allowed himself to run short of cash, and so on. As soon as you perceive the direction in which he is headed, you must make a counter-move, and put up a roadblock of defensive manners. You sympathize. You know all too well about the spiraling cost of living. You too are running desperately short, but believe that it is better to tighten one's belt than to rack up huge debts on credit. You must make it clear, as a general policy, that you do not believe in borrowing money, and certainly aren't in any position to lend it. You are free to invent an excuse for not lending money and or property, but the excuse must cast no aspersion upon the person with the hand out. Then change the subject cheerfully to show, if you wish to, that in all other respects you are a good friend interested in his welfare. If you do lend money, you have to lend it gladly or not at all. You cannot ask what the money is for. It is now his money and his business. You must never state when you want it back. The other person must say when he will pay you back. In fact, you have to recognize that you've given up the whole thing voluntarily. You should never lend what you are not prepared to lose. The hard times of your friend, whatever the cause, may continue long beyond his original expectations. He may even not be able to repay you at all. If you insist that he gave his word, and that you absolutely relied upon getting this money back at a certain time, you will only end up frustrating yourself and adding distress to your friend. There are only two ways of avoiding such a contretemps. Either you do not lend anything under any circumstances, or else you lend in such amounts and to such people only that which you are willing to bestow as a gift. Either money is too important to you to lend, or else it is too unimportant to worry about. As I have never borrowed from anyone, I have no experience as a debtor, but in my solicitations for material from others for this book, in the areas of modern social life where manners are needed most, the subject of money was clearly a sore one. "There's nothing like money to bring out the wrong stuff in people," said one young man in the audience of my show. By the wrong stuff, he explained, he meant all that is petty and mean-spirited in human beings, all that is paranoid and vindictive. He related the saga of a personal loan, which he had obtained from a former friend, now paid in full, but not before the friendship was ruined. I regarded his story as a grotesque soap opera, and found it hard to believe that fully grown people could be so childish. But when he finished, Others in the audience affirmed that what they had heard was a common tale among common men where common currency is involved. All that these gratuitously overwrought dramas suggest is that money is more important than people, and the most treacherous friend that a man can have is one who does not know this truth about himself, and who poses as someone who is spiritually advanced and generous in nature, when in fact he is just as ruthlessly materialistic and money-grubbing as a bill collector. The young gentleman in question should never have borrowed the money. He should have lived within his means, but having made the mistake of becoming indebted to another, he seems to have behaved as well as one could hope. He did repay the sum at the first opportunity, which was precisely what he had promised originally, and he refused to escalate the war by insulting the man who was hounding him. The trouble with linking money with friendship is that as long as the friendship flourishes, the debt may be forgiven. But if something happens to the friendship, even if it simply expires from boredom, any outstanding debts are likely to be pursued vindictively, with a vengeance and a persistence that no bank would ever resort to. For all the once positively charged emotions that fueled the friendship now run the opposite way. As I noted earlier, only unprincipled people turn to the law for authority. People with the right stuff solve their own problems amiably, like adults, and always with good manners. In future, it would be in everyone's best interests if this gentleman and others like him adds former money-lender to all the other earlier roles in life for which he was so unsuited. Even when the money was repaid, the young man continued to meet with social embarrassments as a result of this loan, for it turned out that his big-hearted friend was even larger of mouth and had broadcast and dramatized for months the details of his dilemma. His roof was leaking, and he couldn't afford to fix it. His car needed repairs, but he couldn't pay the garage. He was in arrears at the bank. He had to borrow a large sum to make ends meet, all because of the young man's tardiness in repaying what he owed. Mutual friends and even innocent bystanders were hectored with unending tales of woe, as he went about complaining in high dudgeon that he had been betrayed and abused, just like King Lear. No one was rash enough to ask him how a loan of only $1,000 could possibly cause such havoc. Surely the lack of this could not account for all his financial troubles, and when the debt was paid, he made no comparable effort to inform the same people that all was now well. Finally, the young man complained to his former friend about his indiscretion in telling so many people of what he had presumed was a private matter between them. He received the snapping rejoinder, "I've never said anything I wouldn't say to your face." The idea that one is willing to say something terrible to somebody's face is no justification for saying it, either to their face or behind their back. If anything, the breach of manners is greater if you say nasty things to the face, for you are then deliberately creating an embarrassing and potentially public situation. So if you are determined to speak evil of people, you must do so behind their backs. You just have to hope that what you say isn't reported. In any case, the breach of manners then passes to the person who repeats what you have said. No well-bred person ever sues anybody for anything, be it money or redress for some imaginary damage done to reputation. Suing people only makes one unpopular. Resorting to the law to resolve a dispute is a declaration of spiritual bankruptcy. One is saying, in effect, I do not have the time, patience, good manners, and diplomatic skills to resolve this problem, therefore I will take refuge in the law. I used examples of this kind to illustrate the lower depths of mankind where money is concerned during my American tour in the autumn and winter of 1983 and 84, playing in Chicago, New Orleans, and other but no less sociologically fascinating places like Austin, Texas. I was a manners mobile, going about the United States, doing my bit to raise the tone during a period of history in which many people seem to be lost at sea without rules, radar, or rudders. I didn't give, nor do I offer readers now, strict navigational instructions. I merely provided a lighthouse beacon by which others might set their own courses. One night in Chicago, a young woman said, "Some of the things you say make sense to me in the context in which you give them, but then when I think about some other application of your advice, I find myself unsure about its soundness. For instance, if we are never to speak badly of anyone publicly, what does that say about politicians or journalists? Could anyone belong to those professions if they were well-mannered?" There are certain occupational groups which are traditionally exempt from manners. Gangsters, for instance, though nowadays even a gangster will spend more time advancing his aims, which are often indistinguishable from those of big legal business, through skillfully conducted social activities, than through antisocial acts of violence. We are nearing the point in this era of artificial intelligence and electronic sophistication where crude strength and a macho attitude are a liability. I believe that in the future it will be those who are patient and polite in a language that a computer understands who will advance, whereas those who are rude and aggressive will make a lot of noise, perhaps do considerable damage, but get nowhere. Gangsters, politicians, and business executives would all benefit from having better manners, but frequently in their lust for power, men of such occupations do not act in their own best interests. They forget to cloak their daggers. There is a certain kind of man who, if he once sees a John Wayne movie in his youth, will forever after be rushing into harm's way with his adult spurs spinning and guns blazing. Vietnam, Falkland Islands, Grenada, Beirut, you name it. Modern life in many parts of the world simply imitates B-movies from Hollywood in the 1940s. Except that, as Gloria Swanson noted in Sunset Boulevard, the movies didn't get bigger, it was the stars who got smaller. So now we have amateur theaters of war all over the globe, and rep theater terrorists in every shopping center practically tripping over their bombs, issuing garbled communiques to the mass media, saying things like, "We, the have-nots, take full responsibility for killing 2 pensioners and their grandchildren by blowing up Santa's Toyland at Dickens and Jones this morning in the name of freedom." I've never met a self-admitted terrorist, but they seem to be closetty types, and I would be surprised to meet one with a grasp of anything other than explosives. How anyone's aims could be advanced by blowing up people unrelated to one's oppression is a mystery to me. As someone who has been oppressed and exploited for most of my life, I am more than entitled to an arsenal of letter bombs and other destructive devices, but I have never had the slightest interest, apart from the occasional violent fantasy, in killing, torturing, and maiming those who have hurt me. This may be partly because I never liked John Wayne movies, but is mainly because I don't want to imitate my enemies in their behavior. Some battles are better lost with one's self-respect intact than won by means which leave one's identity in tatters. Now let us push onwards and downwards to the press club. All journalism is ill-mannered. All journalists must expect to be considered as lacking in taste and breeding. In England, most people try not to let journalists into their homes at all, because they know perfectly well that they will be written about, and in England, unless you are a Sex Pistol running about half-cocked, no publicity is wholly good. In America, I don't think it matters so much. People do seem to be willing to be written about, and even encourage it as proof of their existence. In either case, whether you've brought it upon yourself, or are quite innocent in the matter, journalism is a rude activity, the intellectual equivalent of breaking wind in public. My final example of the wrong stuff involves a family so sensitive to its standing in a certain community that it threatened to launch a lawsuit against a publisher for having run an article which they found embarrassing. The article did not mention the family by name. Indeed, no one who was not already unusually familiar with the facts that were disclosed could have begun to guess the identity of the family. But that did not prevent the mother and son team from charging forth and hiring a lawyer to preserve the remnants of family honor. As a motive for misbehavior, social status runs a poor third to money and sex, but it is still the origin of many a brouhaha. When someone feels that their reputation has been harmed in some way, revenge against the offending party can become as intensely passionate as 3 or 4 of the deadly sins combined. I maintain that, whatever you hear about yourself, you should not challenge it. If you are truly a good person, and your goodness is apparent to most people who meet you, why on earth should you pay the slightest attention to a rumor, or even a public allegation? It is only people who crave a reputation which they do not deserve, who must call in lawyers to preserve appearances. A lawsuit is the 20th century equivalent of a duel, and like a duel, it proves nothing, only in movies is the best man the best shot, while engorging the emotions of all concerned, making everyone think the blackest thoughts about the opposite side. A lawsuit is a deliberate act of rudeness carried out by proxies, and the reason why people hire proxies to do their dirty work is that they know that what they are doing is wrong and rude, but they feel less responsibility if they are not directly involved in the confrontation. It is usually well-educated people who resort to lawsuits. People of the lower classes, when offended, still rely on the old bop on the nose, which, in my view, compounds their error, for in setting the machinations of legal mischief in motion, they are confessing that their education, their professed interest in culture and the humanities, is a fraud. I believe that 2 people of goodwill can solve any problem. When this does not happen, when one party gets on his or her high horse of indignation and declares the other party a scoundrel, then we are in the presence of human perversity and human tragedy. There is no doubt that the journalist at the wormy core of this story is a writer of the worst sort, an undistinguished graduate of the George Orwell school. Such writers often fancy themselves as thought-provoking, socially conscious agitators, but usually they will settle for any response from a reader whom they pin down with lurid disclosures, box his ears with facts he doesn't want to know, pummel him with paranoia, torture him with conspiracy theories, and then when the reader is so overwhelmed and alarmed that he can barely speak, the writer will expect some journalism award. So the trouble with lawsuits, as with most forms of rudeness, is that they do not work. Suing a person to claim money is not likely to end in your receiving repayment any faster than you normally would. Indeed, remaining friends with someone over a difficult period is much more likely to preserve goodwill and earn gratitude, whereas an atmosphere of paranoid confrontation is likely to make for bad vibes. Suing a person to protect your good name is even more self-defeating. Such an action reveals that you are insecure and feel that you require some external authority to declare you to be a lady, even if you are a tramp. Furthermore, you will probably be required to reveal a great deal more unsavory information. You weren't drunk on 5th January, as the story alleged, but you were stoned every other night that week than the original slander contained, so that you may well win the battle but lose the war. A lawsuit brings out the worst in everybody, and anyone who chooses to increase the incivility of modern life is a reprehensible rogue indeed, no matter what ideals motivate his actions. There is little justification for most of the misunderstandings between people, and there is never any justification for conducting a private quarrel in public. Sexual manipulation, financial manipulation, and legal manipulation. These are the most common ways in which people of the wrong stuff try to gain power. If I were the actress in that long ago first example, I would say to the amorous producer, "I am deeply flattered by your attentions, but I am even more deeply involved in an important relationship, and I couldn't possibly be unfaithful to him. Besides, it's deeply important, to an actress everything is deep, for me to gain recognition on the basis of whatever talent I have. Even if your boss has a reptilian aspect that gives you the willies, you are obliged to flatter him slightly while making your negative message clear. Villains, too, have feelings." In the second case, I would make a clear-cut decision, when asked for a loan, as to whether it is money that is sacred or whether it is people who are paramount. If I chose the first, I would decline the loan. If I chose the second course, the money would be of no consequence to me, and it would be a pleasant surprise to be repaid when my friend could afford it. If I were the supposedly injured party of the third case, I would ask myself calmly, are these statements true? And if so, what is to be gained by trying to discredit the journalist who wrote them? Actually, this problem would never arise with me, as I have divulged too much about myself already to be of any interest to investigating journalists. I can well imagine a middle-aged woman reading this book. The immature aren't likely to be interested, and the criminally insane are exempt from reading it, and saying to her husband, "See, dear, Mr. Crisp says that one should never sue anybody. He says all conversations should aspire to be pleasant, even when the business at hand is unpleasant and the people you are dealing with are hopelessly neurotic." And the husband may say, "I don't care what some old poof has to say about anything." The woman who has read the text closely will reply, "Mr. Crisp says that you can't judge the worth of an idea by its origin. He says that many people persist in being pushy and rude because they think that their tactics are effective, whereas they have never compared how much further they might get if they were more considerate and polite." Indeed, to one and all of the wrong stuff, these are my parting words. Every time we speak, we can make some situation better, or we can make it worse. Either one works, little by little, day by day, to raise the tone of social life within one's sphere of influence, or one ends up, carelessly or deliberately, exacerbating the relationships of which one is part, making most or all of them function less well, less smoothly, and lowering the level of social life. It is this simple. You bring light to the lives of others, or else you bring darkness. Either you have a concept of what constitutes good behavior in your relations with others, and feel ashamed when your manners fail, or when you fail your manners, or else the truth about you is that you are not a good person, and never will be, and anyone of common sense should abandon you, and run hatless into the street when they see you coming. There are even people so perverse that after they have treated you badly and exposed you to all sorts of embarrassment and harassment, they will ring and suggest that you meet them for drinks and a few words of conciliation. Don't go. Stay put, whatever you do. Once a person has treated you badly, I mean really badly, not merely being late for the theater or getting drunk and pressing your knee, chances are that your forgiveness will only make him incorrigible. He will sin and beg forgiveness, then sin again and beg for more forgiveness, and then sin again. Take my advice, pack your bags and leave. Let the unlovable cook their own dinners, wash and iron their own clothes, and stew alone in their goulash of bile and spleen. Thank you for listening. 2 more chapters to go.